Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sosotris, and this week I wanted to talk about rereading. Question for you. Do you reread books you've already read? I know for some people this is a no-brainer. They reread their favorite books all the time. That's one reason why a lot of people collect books and have bookshelves so they can return to books in the future. But there are others who just want to read a book once and then move on. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but this is more for the folks who are specifically avoiding rereading books because they think that there's nothing to be gained by rereading it. Sort of like once you've read it, it's like damaged, it's soiled, you can't ever go back to it again because it would be boring and lacking flavor. But I want to argue that rereading is not only good, but it's also essential, especially if it's a book that you really truly love and want to get the most out of. So in the world of literary criticism, you often don't say that you kind of understand a book enough to write about it until you've read it a couple times, usually like 2 or 3 times. But that's mostly just something that like nerds do. Think of your favorite TV show, one of those ones that you could talk about forever. If someone put you up on stage and said, here, you have to talk for a half hour about your favorite TV show, and you don't have any notes, but just go on ahead. The reason why you kind of know something that well is because you've probably watched that show over and over and over again. Maybe it's a comfort show, maybe it's something you watch annually, and it means a lot to you. And so when you rewatch it, it gets kind of cemented into your brain more permanently. And so that way, if someone asks you about it later, you can just talk about it forever and go on and on and on and on. And no one can stop you because you're like, this is my hyperfixation and I'm going to make it your problem now. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we're not really talking about analyzing books. There's a very few of us weirdos who like reading something that close to the point where they could maybe write something about it. I don't really do that much anymore, though I have considered doing, literary analysis of certain books on here, but we'll see how that goes, because, you know. But so looking back, when I was younger, I would read obsessively. I would race through books all the time. It felt like I was reading a lot more than I'm reading now for some reason. But I was always kind of skimming through them really fast. I was really impatient and I wanted to read as many books as possible. And so I would zoom through a book. And when I got to the end, if someone asked me about it, they're like, oh, what's the book about? I would kind of blue screen and would be able to kind of tell them a vague idea of what the book was about, but I didn't really know a whole lot about it. And so when I would reread something, especially if it was a book that I really liked, I would pick up things that I'd missed before. One example is Jurassic Park. This is kind of one of the first books that got me into reading in junior high when I was really kind of obsessively devouring books. And it felt like every time I read this, it was like it was a book I'd never read before. There was like scenes in the beginning and like one scene at the end that kind of stuck in my brain, but for the most part, the main content of the book was always just, it kind of flew over my head. And every time I read it, it was like I was reading it for the first time, and that was really exciting. But looking back at it now, let's say I'm older now and I read things slower now. I'm not as fast a reader as I was when I was like 15. But now, so let's say I'm reading things slower. Does it still mean that rereading is worth it? I can understand maybe rereading stuff you read as a kid that you didn't, read very closely. You kind of zoomed through it. But there is still a value in rereading things as an adult, especially if it's something that you don't remember very well. And so this takes me to my second point. Reading is a very subjective experience. We tend to think of like the content of a book doesn't change, obviously, but we tend to think that like when you read a book, you kind of get everything out of it and then you move on. But reading is very much influenced by like our mental state, our emotions, what's going on in our world at that point, what kind of things we're interested in, that kind of thing. And so when you reread a book, sometimes you're going to have a totally different experience. Even if you liked it the first time, you can reread it again and maybe it hits you in a different way. Maybe it has a more emotional impact than it did before, because certain things that happen in your life that kind of clued you into different aspects of the book that you didn't pick up on before. An example of this one was in high school. I read Wuthering Heights, and I remember I really enjoyed it. I liked the florid, opulent language. I liked the gothic atmosphere. I liked the ghost encounter at the beginning that may or may not be a dream. And I remember, I enjoyed reading it, but I reread this recently, and it was like I'd never read the book before. There was so much depth that I just didn't pick up on before. Before, I was all about kind of the aesthetic of the world of the book, but I didn't really connect with the characters in a meaningful way. I didn't really understand what was driving them. I didn't really understand what they were reacting against. And so when I reread it now as an adult, it was like I was reading it for the first time, because these characters are going through a whole lot of angst, and it's the kind of angst that me as a high school student couldn't relate to. I was like, well, they just seem angry all the time, but that's okay, because I was there just for kind of the spooky moors and the ghostly kind of vibes. But reading it as an adult, I picked up on so much of the characters' journeys and the things that they were anxious about and the things that they were reacting against and the things that made them angry, and all of that just kind of clicked with me as an adult. And I did enjoy this when I read it when I was younger, but it was like a whole other book when I read it more recently. And so that's one thing you can do when you reread something. Even if you enjoyed it, you're going to be in a different place when you reread it, even if it's just a few years difference. You're going to have different experiences. You're going to have different, levels of knowledge and understanding. You're going to have read other things. And each time you read it, it's like you're a different person. And so the book gets filtered through you, and you experience different aspects of the book that kind of relate to where you are. So rereading is definitely valuable. Even if you enjoyed something and you felt like you kind of got a lot out of it, rereading it is definitely a way to kind of, learn more about yourself, because you're going to be a different person each time you reread it, which is usually going to be like a couple years separated. So, definitely give that a go. But what about like age appropriate books that you read when you were younger that were kind of aimed at your age level and you enjoyed it? Is there any value in rereading those again? And I'm going to still say yes. When I was younger, I really loved the His Dark Materials trilogy. There's 2 more books now in the series, maybe a 6th one. I don't know. But I really enjoyed this when I was young, and it was kind of aimed at young people, and I connected with it, and I read it like over and over and over again, and I really enjoyed the world. But a lot of the mythology that kind of underpins the whole book is based on like John Milton's Paradise Lost, Dante's Inferno to an extent. There's like Christian theology in there, but like the more fantastical side of things. A lot of the Gnostic, non-canon things. And so I think it would be really interesting to reread this as an adult. It is aimed at young readers, but it's intelligently written enough that I could enjoy this as an adult. That's fine. Adults read YA stuff all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like reading it now, I'd be focusing on totally different things. Instead of getting caught up in like the magic and the other characters and the creatures that you meet, just digging into kind of how this relates to theology and how it engages with the source material like Paradise Lost. Now that I've actually read that, I don't know, I feel like rereading it now would be a really interesting experience, and I definitely want to do that. I haven't reread it in a very long time, but this is definitely on my reading list for this year, because I don't know, I would really like to kind of view it afresh and see if it holds up, and 2, what kind of other aspects of the world that I would kind of connect with. So I don't know. I think rereading is valuable and important. So all of this is to say that rereading books is good. I know there's this pressure to always be reading new things, but even if you just read, like, if you reread one book a month and then all the rest of the books you read each month are like new books you haven't read before, you're still going to be making progress and you're still going to be reading new things. But like, don't give up on the concept of rereading something. You know, when you finish a book, it doesn't just go on your shelf as like a trophy and it's there kind of forever to never be touched again. Obviously, if it's on your shelf, you want to be able to like revisit it at some point. And so if it's something that, like, a book that like it challenged you, or it really spoke to you, or it made you think in certain ways that kind of were like inspiring or something, definitely give that a go, you know, a few years down the road, because I think you'll be really surprised at how different the reading experience is. So with that said, you know, go out there, read new things, read old things, just enjoy reading. That's kind of the whole point of this channel. And there's a cat here, and she really, really wants me to give her attention. So with that said, I will let you go. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, enjoy your reading. All right, bye.